This is an NBC News special report. Here is NBC News correspondent John Chancellor.
Good evening. President Reagan is in good condition tonight in a Washington hospital after several hours of emergency surgery. His press secretary, James Brady, is in extremely serious condition with brain damage. A Secret Service agent who was also shot is doing well, while a District of Columbia policeman is in serious condition with bullet wounds in the shoulder and the neck. And a young man accused of firing the shots was arraigned this evening. All the result of a tragic few seconds this afternoon outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, which we see in slow motion, when the assassin started firing at almost point-blank range. That's the sound of the first shot. You see a Secret Service man turning. He was shot. The president being thrown into his car. On the ground, James Brady, the press secretary, and under that, that's Mr. Brady there now, and under that other pile, the assassin. The surgery to remove the bullet from President Reagan's left lung was described as relatively simple, made easier because the president is in such good physical shape. He walked into the hospital, never went into shock, joked with the doctors, and in the words of a hospital spokesman, sailed through it. Chris Wallace is outside George Washington University Hospital now, and here is his latest report. Chris?
John, the president is now resting in his room at the hospital, and Mrs. Reagan has gone back to the White House. All indications are that the president's medical situation is now under control. As you reported, Mr. Reagan underwent 2 hours of surgery this afternoon. Afterwards, medical officials here at the hospital said that the prognosis for his full recovery is, quote, excellent. But the word is not nearly so good on Presidential Press Secretary James Brady. As of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this evening, Brady was still in surgery, his condition still critical. Doctors say that a bullet went into his forehead, passed through his brain, and caused extensive damage. Still, all reports on the president's condition are very encouraging. Dr. Dennis O'Leary, who is the dean for clinical affairs here at the hospital, said that by the time the anesthesia wears off tomorrow morning, that Mr. Reagan should be fully able to conduct his duties as president. Earlier this evening, Dr. O'Leary described the president's wound and the operation. Here now is an excerpt from that briefing.
It was a single bullet wound that entered slightly underneath the left armpit. It traversed about 3 inches of the chest wall and then ricocheted off the 7th rib into the left lower lobe of the lung and moved about 3 inches into the lung substance itself. The operative incision is about 6 inches in width, relatively simple procedure. The bullet was removed and then the incision was closed. And as I say, he is stable and in good condition.
Do you expect him to be back to normal routine within, say, 2 months?
Depends on totally normal routine. I would guess probably a couple of months after his hospitalization, so maybe 2.5 to 3 months might be a good guess, but it is a guess.
Mrs. Reagan is fine. She's calm. She's been calm and composed throughout this ordeal. She is grateful for the outpouring of support and prayers from all over the world. She's also grateful for the fine medical attention that her husband is receiving. And lastly, she's praying for Jim Brady, for Agent McCarthy, and Officer Delahanty, and she hopes everyone else is too.
Doctors here continue to marvel at how well President Reagan has come through this experience. Dr. O'Leary said that it fell just short of being medically extraordinary. The president walked into the hospital on his own power. He never lost consciousness and apparently joked as he was being wheeled out of surgery that I'd rather be in Philadelphia, W.C. Field's old joke. One longtime Reagan aide said later, he is a tough old man. Chris Wallace, NBC News at the George Washington Medical Center.
This is Roger Mudd in Washington. From all indications, the gunman got off 6 shots in about 2 seconds simply by squeezing the trigger as fast as he could. 1 shot hit the window of the president's limousine. 1 shot has not been found, but 4 shots hit living targets. The president, of course, but also Presidential Press Secretary James S. Brady, 40 years old. The hospital said Mr. Brady is fighting for his life and that it is likely he will suffer some permanent brain damage. He is listed in critical condition. Less critically wounded were Secret Service agent Timothy J. McCarthy, 31, a native of Chicago. He is in stable condition on the plus side, after surgery for a gunshot wound in the stomach. And Metropolitan Police Officer Thomas K. Delahanty, 45, a native of Pittsburgh. He is reported in serious but stable condition, pending a decision on whether to operate to remove a bullet which entered through the shoulder from the rear and lodged in the neck. Several hours after the shooting this afternoon, Secretary of State Alexander Haig appeared before cameras to pronounce himself in charge at the White House, pending the arrival from Texas of Vice President George Bush, who just last week was picked by President Reagan to be his crisis manager rather than Haig. John Palmer brings us up to date on the functioning and control of the federal government.
Immediately after returning to the White House after an interrupted speaking engagement in Texas, Vice President Bush went immediately to the Situation Room to chair a meeting with Secretary of State Haig and other cabinet members. Then he spoke with reporters to reassure the nation.
I am deeply heartened by Dr. O'Leary's report on the President's condition, that he has emerged from this experience with flying colors and with the most optimistic prospects for a complete recovery. I can reassure this nation and a watching world that the American government is functioning fully and effectively. We've had full and complete communications throughout the day, and the officers of the federal government have been fulfilling their obligations with skill and with care.
The Vice President left the White House for his Washington home this evening about an hour ago, after again conferring with other cabinet members and Mrs. Reagan in the family quarters here at the White House. He had an extra-large security escort, and extra agents are posted at his Washington residence tonight. The White House says that there was never any problem about the chain of command today or who was in charge while the president was undergoing his 2-hour operation at the Georgetown Hospital not far from here, George Washington Hospital. They point out that Secretary Haig came immediately here to the White House after there were reports that the president had been shot or that shots were fired at the president as he got into his car, that Vice President Bush was in the air and in contact with Secretary of State Haig through their elaborate communication setup from the Vice President's plane in the Situation Room here at the White House. And then they point out that as soon as the Vice President arrived here, he went directly to the Situation Room and met with other members of the cabinet, and that the situation never was out of hand. The White House says it was always under control. John Palmer, NBC News at the White House.
As expected here in Washington this evening, the gun control debate is already in full swing. The Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms says the shooting is very sad evidence that gun controls do not work because Washington has a tough gun control law on the books already, and the shooting still occurred. But Chairman Peter Rodino of the House Judiciary Committee says he will push for a ban on Saturday night specials and more detailed reporting of gun sales. John?
More information is turning up tonight about John W. Hinckley, Jr., the man accused of firing the shots. He was arraigned in court in Washington, D.C. tonight. There is no evidence that there was anyone else in conspiracy with Hinckley, it all appears as though he was acting alone. His family in Denver said Hinckley has recently been under the care of a psychiatrist.